My people, have you ever heard a tree speak? No, not with words, but with spirit, with memory, with warnings, long before cathedrals touched the skies of Europe. Long before temples rose in Asia, Africa had her own sanctuaries, not built by hands, grown by time. Her temples were forests, her priests, trees, animals, wind, and those who knew how to listen. These were not just trees. These were sacred forests, living libraries of ancestral wisdom, places where gods walked, where the veil between the living and the spirit realm was thinner than bark. In Ghana, they call it the Asosia, the earth goddess. To tread on sacred forest land without permission was not just taboo, it was suicidal. A disrespect to nature meant a disrespect to the ancestors, and that, my friend, carried consequences. From the Oshogbo groves of Nigeria, to the voodoo forests of Benin, to the protected spirit groves of Kenya's Kaya elders, these green cathedrals held secrets, spirits, and stories that shaped empires. But today, chainsaws roll where chants once echoed. Gold mines swallow what the gods once protected. We forgot, or maybe, we were forced to forget. Because when the colonizers came, they didn't see spirit. They saw timber. They didn't hear ancestors. They heard silence. And they didn't ask permission. They just took. But the forest never forgets. So, today, we step into the shadows, where stories still live in leaves, where curses sleep beneath roots, where Africa still remembers. This is Ancestral Files, and this is the sacred forests of Africa. These forests were not silent. They governed, they judged, they ruled. In many African societies, the forest was more than sacred. It was sovereign. The Yoruba, Akan, Ido, and Bantu-speaking peoples all maintained complex, spiritual and political systems where the forest acted as both witness and judge. You did not enter a sacred grove lightly. It was a courtroom, a temple, and a palace all in one. In southeastern Nigeria, the Igbo people honored the Uhomiri Orila, goddesses of lakes and the earth, within forest sanctuaries. These were spaces where oracles like the famed Orokuku Long Juju rendered divine judgments. The Orokuku shrine was not just religious, it was political. Disputes across vast distances were settled here. Justice, guided by the forest spirits, held more weight than that of distant kings or colonial governors. For the Ashanti of Ghana, sacred groves such as the Esamija Sacred Grove near Kumasi held immense political power. It was believed the golden stool, the soul of the Ashanti nation, was spiritually tied to these hidden places. To touch the golden stool meant death. To cut down a sacred tree meant war. In the Great Lakes region, particularly among the Chwezi dynasty and later the Baganda kingdom, forests were associated with ancestral spirits and royal legitimacy. Kings would retreat to sacred groves for initiation rites, prayers, or to consult mediums. These were not just ceremonial acts. They validated the king's authority through connection to the ancestors and the land. Each forest had its guardians, not in fables, but in ritual practice. Among the Kikuyu, the Magumo tree fig tree was seen as a bridge to Gai, the god who lived atop Mount Kenya, in Dahomey modern-day Benin. Vodun spirits were invoked under forest canopies, where initiates were reborn into new spiritual ranks. To desecrate a forest wasn't a crime against nature, it was a crime against God, the ancestors, and your very bloodline. before European legal systems were forced upon African communities. Sacred forests were legal zones. Customary laws, enforced by forest priests, diviners and elders, kept peace and order. Even during conflict, these groves were respected as neutral ground, much like medieval churches in Europe. These were the original parliaments. The trees listened, the wind carried verdicts, and justice, though invisible, always had roots. As foreign explorers, missionaries, and colonial powers entered Africa, they struggled to understand these laws and loyalties rooted in what they saw as just trees. But to the people, these forests were the archives of memory, the courthouses of conscience, and the guardians of truth. To control Africa, you first had to silence its forests. They came with maps, muskets, and missions, but they couldn't read the language of the trees. To the colonial powers, the African forest was not sacred. It was timber, rubber, ivory, and land. British, French, Portuguese, and Belgian administrations redrew sacred groves on maps, labeling them virgin land or government forest reserves. They cleared trees that had stood for centuries unaware or indifferent to the spirits that dwell there. What the ancestors guarded for 1,000 years, colonial hands destroyed in a season. Colonial administrators and Christian missionaries banned forest-based rituals, calling them fetishism, paganism, or witchcraft. In Nigeria, Orisha worship in sacred groves was criminalized. In Ghana, libation pouring and ancestral ceremonies were discouraged or mocked. In Kenya, Kikuyu priests who met under sacred magumo trees were arrested or forced into hiding. The trees were not just chopped. The memory, the meaning, and the messages they carried were erased. From Kumasi to Kinshasa, many of today's cities were built over or around sacred groves. The Lagos Lagoon, once a site of sacred rights to ocean, became an industrial hub. In Kampala, sacred Baganda forests were flattened for colonial roads and government houses. Even the Benin Kingdom's sacred forest, home to the Oba's ancestral rituals, was breached and looted after the British punitive expedition of 1897. But Africa didn't stay silent. Resistance movements often drew strength from forest spirits and the land itself. The Mau Mau uprising in Kenya was planned in sacred forests. Fighters swore oaths under magumo trees, invoking ancestral wrath on traitors. In Ghana, Ashanti revolts often launched from forest hideouts blessed by traditional priests. In Nigeria, Arrow warriors and forest-dwelling cults resisted British expansion for decades. The forest became both shield and sword, hiding rebels, holding secrets, and summoning storms. The colonial legacy wasn't just in laws or languages. It was in the severing of spiritual roots. Children were taught to fear the forest, not for its mystery, but for its danger. Rituals were forgotten. Stories went untold. Trees that once held history stood mute. The sacred forests were no longer feared, but forgotten. Yet, even after fire and axe, some trees remained, hidden, weathered, whispering. And now, the descendants of those who once danced, healed, and prayed beneath the canopy are returning. What was nearly lost is finding its way home. Across Africa, the call of the forest is being heard again. In Ghana, The Tono Sacred Grove once desecrated is being reprotected by local chiefs and herbalists. In Nigeria, shrines to Ocean, Yemoya, and Ogun have been rebuilt along the Osun River and sacred groves in Osogbo. In Benin, Vodun priests are restoring forest altars once destroyed during colonization and Christian campaigns. The ancestors may fall silent, but they do not forget. Young Africans are returning to the old ways, not in rebellion, but in rediscovery. In Senegal, the griots retell forest tales once buried by silence. In Zambia and Malawi, sacred initiation forests are being revived by elders to teach values, history, and nature respect. In Uganda, the Baganda Kingdom has restored certain royal groves and now hosts traditional tree planting festivals. The language of the trees is being learned again. Traditional leaders, environmentalists, and even governments are working together to legally protect sacred forests. In Kenya, parts of the Kaya forest sacred to the Mijikenda people are now UNESCO World Heritage Sites. In Nigeria, the Osunosogbo Sacred Grove is protected by both federal law and traditional custodians. In Ethiopia, church forests, remnants of sacred groves surrounding Orthodox churches, are being replanted and shielded. When culture and conservation walk side by side, the forest grows back. Across the diaspora, from Brazil to Haiti to the United States, descendants of enslaved Africans are returning to forest-based spirituality. In Cuba, Santeria priests plant sacred trees to honor Yoruba deities. In Brazil, cannibal temples recreate African forest altars. In the Caribbean, Obia and Voodoo are being decolonized, studied and respected anew. The sacred forests of Africa cast long shadows across oceans, and the children of the diaspora are walking in them again. We are not just planting trees, we are planting memory. This grove belonged to my great-grandmother's spirit. I can feel her when I enter. The forest has always been our cathedral. In a time of climate crisis, many are now looking to Africa's sacred groves as models for environmental and spiritual healing. They teach balance, respect, community, not just for the earth, but for each other. In the forest, no one tree grows alone. Every branch leans on another. Every root drinks from the same earth. That is the wisdom of the sacred grove. But if the forests are returning, what do they ask of us now? In the final act, we step into the trees, not as conquerors or wanderers, but as children returning home. The forest is not a relic. It is a living story still unfolding. The sacred forests are more than groves of trees. They are archives of memory, temples of spirit, and schools of survival. In their silence, we hear ancestral wisdom. In their shadows, we feel cosmic protection. In their presence, we are reminded we are not alone. To enter a sacred forest is to step into eternity. The ancestors are not gone. They are simply waiting beneath the canopy. Even those far from Africa are hearing the call. In inner city Chicago, young black students plant trees to honor their roots. In Jamaica, Maroon communities hold annual forest ceremonies to mark their spiritual independence. In South Africa, eco-priests blend indigenous cosmology with environmental activism, teaching forest healing in townships. The sacred grove is no longer just a place. It is a global awakening. What was stolen is being reclaimed. Colonialism tried to erase these spaces with chains, with crosses, with concrete. But the shrines are being rebuilt. The songs are being sung again. The spirits are being welcomed home. You can cut down a tree, but you cannot cut down the memory of the seed. The next generation are the new forest keepers. Young Africans are blending technology and tradition to map, protect, and revitalize sacred groves. Apps are tracking endangered forest zones tied to rituals. Podcasts and YouTube channels like this one are telling the stories the textbooks won't. This is not the end of the story. It's the return of the first chapter. Final words, a prayer in the wind. May the trees rise again. May the rivers remember their songs. May the ancestors smile from the roots. And may we, the children of Africa, walk gently through the groves once more. The sacred forests of Africa still speak. Are you listening? Subscribe, share, awaken. You're part of history.